Imagine being woken up at 2 a.m. by the sound of your own front door being kicked off its hinges. For most people, it's their ultimate nightmare. For Special Agent Elena Vance, it was the moment her past came screaming back, and the moment three foolish boys learned that the quiet woman at the end of the lane was the last person on earth they should have ever targeted. If you're ready for a story of justice, revenge, and the quiet strength that hides in plain sight, you're in the right place. Subscribe and join us, because this is a tale you won't forget. The rain in the sleepy town of Cedar Brook, Washington, wasn't a storm, but a constant, whispering presence. It pattered against the roof of a small, isolated cottage nestled deep among towering pines, a house that seemed to deliberately shy away from the streetlights. Inside, the only light came from the dying embers in a stone fireplace, casting long, dancing shadows across the face of the woman who lived there. Her name was Elena Vance. To her neighbors, she was the quiet woman who worked from home, probably in tech or maybe as a writer. She kept to herself, smiled politely when fetching her mail, and her most exciting weekly event appeared to be a trip to the local grocery store. They didn't know about the scars, both physical and mental, that she carried. They didn't know that her quietness wasn't shyness, but a profound and practiced vigilance. They didn't know that 3 years prior, Elena Vance had been the star undercover operative in the FBI's takedown of the Vipers, a brutal syndicate that had terrorized the tri-state area. She had been the one who got deep inside, who earned their trust, and who ultimately pulled the trigger that sent their leader, a man named Silas the King Kowalski, to a lifetime in a supermax prison. But in the process, she had been made. Kowalski, from his cell, had issued a blood oath against her and everyone she loved. A failed attempt on her life in a Philadelphia safe house had left her partner, David, dead in her arms. The Bureau, in exchange for her testimony and her sanity, had given her a new name and a new life here, in this rainy, forgotten corner of the country. The quiet wasn't a preference, it was a necessity for survival. Every creak of the old house, every snap of a twig outside, was a potential echo of that past life hunting for her. The three young men speeding down the slick, dark road in a lifted, mud-splattered truck saw the world in a very different way. Their leader was Kyle, the 19-year-old son of the town's most wealthy real estate developer. He was all swagger and entitlement, a boy who had never been told no, and whose cruelty was a form of entertainment. Beside him was Jake, a follower, eager for a shred of Kyle's confidence. And in the back seat, the youngest Lam, 16 and visibly uncomfortable, dragged along by his desperate desire to belong. Their evening had been a cocktail of cheap beer and loud complaints. Their main grievance, Elena Vance. A week prior, Kyle, in a fit of road rage after she dared to drive the speed limit in front of him, had laid on his horn and screamed obscenities. She had simply pulled over, letting him pass, her eyes meeting his in the rearview mirror with a calm, unnerving stillness. It wasn't the reaction he wanted. He wanted fear, submission. He got nothing. That nothingness festered in him. The psycho bitch in the woods, he called her. Thinks she's better than everyone. We need to teach her a lesson. The lesson had started as egging her house, then slashing the tires on her sensible sedan. Each act of petty vandalism was met with the same infuriating silence. No police were called. No angry confrontations at the door. Just quiet. To Kyle, it was a challenge. His ego couldn't tolerate being ignored. Tonight, fueled by liquid courage, the lesson was escalating. We're just gonna knock on the door, real loud, and run, Jake had said, trying to sound convincing, scare the hell out of her. But as they pulled up, the darkness of the house, its isolation, empowered Kyle's malice. Knocking. He sneered. We're not kids. We're making a statement. Inside, Elena was in the deepest stage of sleep, a rare state for her, untroubled by the usual nightmares of gunfire and David's face. The first to shoot against the front door didn't fully wake her. It merely registered as a strange, dissonant sound in a dream. The second T-sheet, louder, more violent, accompanied by the sickening crack of wood, jolted her into a heart-pounding, breath-stealing reality. Her body moved before her mind could fully process. This was the drill. This was the moment she had trained for, dreaded, and yet somehow, in the deepest part of her soul, expected. She rolled out of bed, her movements fluid and silent, her bare feet finding the cold wooden floor. She didn't go to the window. She didn't call out. She moved to her closet. Inside, behind a false panel in the back, was a small safe. Her fingers, steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins, dialed the combination. The door swung open. Inside, nestled beside a loaded Glock 19, was a dark blue windbreaker. And across the back, in bold, bright yellow letters, were three initials that carried the weight of a nation's justice: FBI. The door gave way with a final, splintering crash. Kyle, Jake, and Liam stumbled into the dark living room, their laughter loud and forced, a mask for their own nervousness. The air in the cottage was still, cool, and smelled of pine and old books. It was not the atmosphere of fear they had anticipated. "Hello, lady!" Kyle shouted, his voice too loud in the quiet space. "We're here for the welcome wagon." They flicked on a flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating tasteful furniture, shelves filled with books, a single, framed photograph of Elena and a man they didn't recognize, David. The normalcy of it all was confusing. Where was the screaming woman, the calls to 911? Then, a floorboard creaked behind them. All three spun around. The beam of the flashlight danced wildly and then settled on a figure standing in the hallway entrance. It was her, the quiet woman. But she wasn't cowering, she wasn't screaming. She was standing perfectly still, her posture erect, her face an unreadable mask of calm intensity, and she was holding something. The flashlight beam, shaking now in Jake's trembling hand, traveled from her face, down her arm to the object in her hand. It was a jacket. She was in the process of slipping it on. As the fabric unfurled, the beam of light caught the bright yellow lettering on the back. FBI. The world seemed to stop. The air was sucked from the room. The laughter died in Kyle's throat, replaced by a strangled gulp. Jake's arm went limp, the flashlight beam dropping to the floor, plunging them into near darkness before bouncing back up, as if magnetically pulled back to those three damning letters. Liam, the youngest, felt a cold dread wash over him so completely he thought he might be sick. The only sound was the soft zip of Elena pulling up the zipper of her jacket. The silence that followed was heavier, more terrifying than any scream could ever be. Kyle's brain, slow and addled by beer and arrogance, tried to rebel. "It's a costume," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You bought that online. You're a freak." But even as he said it, his eyes were taking in the details his brain had initially missed. The way she stood like a soldier. The cold, assessing look in her eyes that was devoid of any civilian fear. And then her voice. It was low, steady, and carried an authority that chilled the room. "Kyle Miller." She said not a question but a statement. Jacob Riordan, Liam Walsh. Hearing their full names spoken in that tone, in the darkness of her violated home, was a psychic blow. How did she know? "You have just violated Title 18, Section 13 of the United States Code, which incorporates state laws on breaking and entering, and you are now looking at a federal charge of assaulting the residence of a federal officer." She took one step forward. "The situation you are in is now magnitudes worse than you can possibly imagine. Put your hands on your heads. Interlace your fingers. Get on your knees. Now." The command was so absolute, so dripping with practiced command, that Jake and Liam immediately complied, their bodies moving on autopilot. Driven by a primal fear of the authority she represented, they dropped to their knees, hands laced on their heads, their bodies trembling. Kyle, however, was frozen by a toxic mix of fear and pride. Surrendering to this woman, this quiet, insignificant woman who had dared to ignore him, was an impossibility. "No," he whispered, then louder, "no." In a desperate, foolish act of defiance, he lunged at her. The next few seconds were a blur of brutal, efficient motion. Elena didn't flinch. She sidestepped his clumsy charge, her left hand snapping out to capture his leading wrist. She pivoted, using his own momentum, and drove him face first into the wall with a sickening thud. Before he could even groan, she had his arm twisted up behind his back in a control hold that sent waves of blinding pain through his shoulder. He cried out, a pathetic, whimpering sound. "You chose poorly." She whispered into his ear, her voice still terrifyingly calm. She forced him to his knees beside his friends. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds. The bullies were neutralized, kneeling on the floor of the home they had broken into, utterly broken themselves. Elena kept them there in the dark for what felt like an eternity. She didn't call 911. Not yet. She picked up her personal, encrypted cell phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "Mitchell," a gruff voice answered. "Sir, it's Vance," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. My cover is intact. The breach was local, not related to the Vipers. 3 subjects neutralized. I need a clean-up crew." A local one. I want this handled quietly. She listened for a moment. No, I'm unharmed. They're just kids. Stupid entitled kids. She ended the call, her eyes never leaving the three figures trembling on her floor. She saw them for what they were now. Not assassins, not a threat from her past, but a symptom of a different kind of sickness, a rot of privilege and petty cruelty. And in that moment, a new plan began to form in her mind. A plan that wasn't just about punishment, but about a far more profound form of justice. Within 20 minutes, two sedans pulled up outside, their headlights cutting off as they arrived. Two men in crisp, professional suits entered the cottage. They nodded at Alina with a deference that made Liam feel faint. These weren't local cops, these were feds. Secure them, Alina said simply. The three boys were handcuffed with a professional efficiency that was far more frightening than any rough handling. They were led out and placed in the back of one of the sedans. Alina got in the front seat of the other car. They weren't taken to the local police station. They were driven to a nondescript federal office building 2 towns over, a place that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. They were placed in a stark, white interrogation room one by one. Liam was first. He was sobbing, his body racked with guilt and terror. Elena sat across from him, not as a victim, but as an investigator. Liam, look at me, she said, her voice softer now, but no less powerful. You're the youngest. You didn't want to be there tonight, did you? He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. I tried to tell them to stop. She leaned forward. The choices you make in the next 5 minutes will define the rest of your life. You can be a follower and go down with Kyle, or you can start making your own choices. Tell me everything. Start with the eggs and end with the door. And he did. He spilled everything, his words a torrent of confession and relief. Jake was next. His bravado had completely evaporated. He was confronted with the federal charges, the reality of a felony record, the end of any future he might have had. He crumbled faster than Liam, eager to pin the blame on Kyle to save himself. Then came Kyle. He sat in the hard chair, his lips swollen, his arm aching, his arrogance replaced by a sullen, simmering rage. Alina placed a file folder on the table. She opened it. It contained their entire lives. School records, social media posts, Kyle's father's business dealings, a traffic ticket Jake got 6 months ago. You thought you were targeting a weak, quiet woman. Elena said, her voice like ice. You were wrong. You targeted a federal agent with the resources of the United States government at her disposal. We know everything about you, and we can make your lives, and the lives of your families, very, very difficult. She let that hang in the air. But I'm not going to do that. Kyle looked up, confused. What? The traditional path would be to bury you. Federal charges, prison time. You'd be felons before you're 20. Your futures would be ash. But that's a quick death. I have something else in mind. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table to each of them. It was a contract of sorts. A meticulously detailed list of reparations. It included, but was not limited to, full financial restitution for her door and all previous damages, paid not by their parents, but by them, through mandated labor at a rate and schedule she dictated. It included 100 hours each of community service. Not picking up trash, but working at a shelter for victims of domestic violence, where they would hear stories of real fear and real courage. It included weekly meetings with a therapist specializing in anger and entitlement, with reports sent directly to her. And it included a formal, written apology, not just to her, but to the entire town, to be read aloud at a community meeting. The final clause was the most powerful. This agreement is binding in perpetuity. Any violation of these terms, any further act of bullying or intimidation against any person, at any point in the future, will result in the immediate reinstatement of all federal and state charges, with the full weight of the evidence collected tonight brought to bear. It was a life sentence of accountability, a prison without bars. They all signed. What choice did they have? But as the weeks turned into months, something strange began to happen. The mandated labor broke them down and built them back up. Liam, working at the shelter, found a sense of purpose he'd never had, finally standing up to Kyle by refusing to participate in a cruel joke at school. Jake, stripped of his toxic social circle, started focusing on his grades and reconnecting with his family. Even Kyle, under the relentless scrutiny of his therapist and the ever-present threat of Elena's contract, began the slow, painful process of confronting the hollow man he was becoming. The bullies were, in effect, being dismantled and reprogrammed. The story concludes 6 months later. The town of Cedar Brook holds its annual summer festival. There is a buzz in the air. The three boys are there, not as tormentors but as volunteers serving food and running booths. They are quieter, more respectful. The community has noticed the change, though few know the true reason. As the sun sets, Alina Vance stands at the edge of the green, watching from a distance. She is still the quiet woman, but the town now regards her with a new, respectful curiosity. Kyle spots her. He hesitates, then walks over to her, his head bowed slightly. "Agent Vance," he said, his voice low. He struggled for the words. "The apology, I meant it." Alina looked at him, her gaze still unreadable, but perhaps a degree less cold. "I know you did," she said. "The work isn't over. It never is." She turned to leave, but then paused, looking back at the festival, at the community she had, in her own strange way, helped to heal and protect. She had come to Cedar Brook to hide, to escape her past. But in facing down this small, local evil, she hadn't just administered justice, she had found a new kind of purpose. The quiet woman wasn't just a survivor, she was a restorer of balance. She walked away from the lights and the music, back into the comforting darkness of the pines, a solitary figure who had turned her deepest nightmare into a lesson in power and redemption for three lost boys, finally finding a fragment of peace in the silence she had fought so hard to protect. This story is a reminder that strength comes in many forms, and that justice isn't always found in a courtroom. To everyone watching this, I have a question for you, one that helps us feel connected as a community. From which part of the country are you watching this video? Are you in the rainy Pacific Northwest like Alina, the sunny South, the bustling Northeast? Let me know in the comments below.